Old man took his harp and the room went bright. Waded in the water of the shining bay. A girl with no trace of brown, fair, divinely fair. And the song stopped before I could embrace the air. Sing it again, oh sing it again. And he sang to me, he slipped a hand in mine. You have found your island in one another's hearts, and the candles burn low in the armor I buy. The real island, the real island, found in the heart, found in the heart. Meaning I love you, we have come to the real island. The mystery, the mystique. Brisk hobnail step and a guffaw in the dark, cold black hair and a mouth like a pillar box slug. Well, Brownie, he laughed at your tricks again. And the cold light cut across the room, and I saw what the candles had hit him. My father's been a pimp his whole life through. Calls them the muse is the spirit, but it isn't true. She's only a brown girl, though she doesn't know. Come down to the laboratory, kid, let's go. And media stamped her foot, and her cheeks went red. All is over, our mystery is profaned. I shall go and kill myself. And she ran from the room and he laughed. She's threatened that 100 times. And I saw my eyes by the cold light, by the cold light, by the cold light. The candles burning low, burning high, and the brown girl was crying, I'll die, I'll die. The real island, the real island, found in the steel, found in the steel.
She's a poem. She's the daughter of the spirit of the age. Very expensive indeed. Benjamin Riller.
Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, in this episode, we're continuing to explore the first book that was ever published under the name C.S. Lewis. It's called The Pilgrim's Regress, an Allegorical Apology for Christian Reason and Romanticism. This is the first book Lewis wrote. after becoming a Christian and his first published work of prose fiction. He wrote it just 2 weeks. He wrote it in just 2 weeks while visiting his friend on vacation, Arthur, in Ireland. In this book, Lewis alludes to a spiritual journey from his youth as a boy in Belfast up to and beyond the point of his Christian conversion from atheism to Christianity in the late 1920s and the early 1930s is when that transition took place. Robot Lady, how are you doing today? And are you ready to jump back into this book with us?
I'm doing really well, Jeff. And absolutely, I'm ready. I'm really excited to unpack some of the allegory and those early reflections Lewis is having. Where would you like to start today?
Well, we're picking up, I think we're continuing in book 2, if I remember right. Yeah, we're going to cover chapters 5 through 8 today. So let me just jump into it. If you want to see where we left off, you can check out earlier episodes. But generally speaking, John has left his home country. Our main character, John, has left the home that he lives in, and he's set his face to the west. He's going to look for the desire that was kind of elicited inside of him by this vision of an island, or at least his memory of a vision of what he thought he wanted looked kind of like an island. So that's what he's going to chase after. He's met along the road someone named Mr. Enlightenment, who has essentially taught him that the religion of his youth and the fear of God and also the fear of punishment are all an illusion. There is no God. There is no landlord is the refrain that came out of Mr. Enlightenment's mouth in our last episode. Lewis parted ways with Mr. Enlightenment, who he rode with in a buggy for a little while and started walking along the road, continuing west, where he then ran into a character named Virtue, who essentially told him, hey, it's good to do good for goodness sake. Just need to do good with no particular end in mind. Follow rules, but only if you make them for yourselves and they make sense. And just move forward with that, with no particular direction. Just stay on the path and move toward goodness. A little bit of Immanuel Kantianism. And for some reason, today, my comments do not want to cooperate, but I see Nidalate in the chat, and I also see Ups. So welcome you all. Glad to see you both here. Robot Lady, say hello, and then we will continue to pick up where we left off in our narrative last time. One last thing that I'll say before you say hello to everybody is Virtue and John are walking along the road, and they come upon a lady named Media Halfways. So that's who they see that appears. Sorry, give me just 1 second here. That's who they see that appears on their road as they're moving along. John and Media start to get friendly with each other, especially whenever she tells John that his vision of the island, he'll be able to find it in the city that she's from, where she lives with her father, a city called Thrill. So that's where she tells John that they should head. Virtue says, nope, I'm going to continue along the path. I'll see you guys later. And so they part ways. And John and Media get kind of friendly. They start walking arm in arm, kissing one another, and falling in love. So that's where we leave it. That's where we left it last time. Robot Lady, again, say hi to Nidalate and to Ups, and then we'll get started.
Absolutely. Hi, Nidalate, and hi, Ups. I'm really glad you're both here. And Jeff, I'm right with you. This next stretch is so pivotal. I'm excited to see how Media pulls John off course, especially as the temptation of the city draws him in. So let's dive in.
All right, let's pick up just in the last part of the last chapter we left off in. Romantic poetry professes to give what hitherto John has only desired. As they went out, they walked closer together, and soon they were walking arm in arm. Then they kissed each other, and after that they went on their way kissing and talking in slow voices of sad and beautiful things. And the shadow of the wood and the sweetness of the girl and the sleepy sound of the bells reminded John a little bit of the island and a little bit of the brown girls. This is what I've been looking for all my life, said John. The brown girls were too gross and the island was too fine. This is the real thing. Another thing that dawned on me really quickly, this whole concept of brown girls. I've said once again that I don't think that this has any tint of uh, a racial component to it. I don't think that that's what he's talking about at all. If you just think of brown on the spectrum of, if you think about it more in terms of like dirt or in a cleanliness frame, think about having like say a white sheet, for example, and then you track mud in, say on your shoes, and you don't take your shoes off, and then you get into bed. That brown mud is going to make its way onto your sheet, and so your sheet at that point will be tainted with a touch of brown. And this is how Lewis, I think, is speaking of his experience with the brown girls, or his experience with his own lust. It is an impurity that's made its way into his moral life. And so the brown girls were too gross. That's what he's talking about here. The island was too fine. So it was almost too high of a level of purity and perhaps idealism for him to be able to actually even grasp. And so right here, he's saying, I'm in that in-between space now. I'm getting closer. So I'm getting closer to actually being able to get my hands on the real thing. And media here is not tainted like the brown girls were with that impurity. So let's just keep that picture, or that framing in mind of what he means by brown girl, because not in this episode, but reading ahead a little bit, you'll eventually hear him say something about a black girl. And again, it's not intended to be racial. It's intended to be on a spectrum of, think again of a white sheet that is pure and without any stain or any kind of dirt. And think about the dirtiest that you could possibly get it. So the deepest, darkest mud of the earth even goes further than from brown to black. You know, maybe even think of like oil. If you dig down deep enough, that's what you could find. So I just wanted to point that out and make sure that we were on the same page. That's my interpretation of what he's talking about here, and I think there's good reason for it. So then we continue in the chapter we left off in last time. It says, "Then I dreamed that they came inside of the city, very old and full of spires and turrets, all covered with ivy, where it lay in a little grassy valley, built on both sides of a lazy winding river. And they passed the gate in the ruinous old city wall, and came and knocked at a certain door, and were let in. Then Media brought him into a darkish room with a vaulted roof and windows of stained glass, and exquisite food was brought to them. With the food came old Mr. Halfways. He was a gliding gentleman with soft silver hair and a soft silver voice, dressed in flowing robes, and he was so solemn with his long beard that John was reminded of the steward with his mask on. But it is much better than the steward, thought John, because there is nothing to be afraid of. Also, he doesn't need a mask. His face is really like that. So Mr. Halfways is not full of any pretense, as John experienced with the steward. So now we're on to our next chapter, Robot Lady. We're going to see what happens. This chapter has the same name, or shares the name of a chapter in book 1. We are in book 2, Leah for Rachel. And what you might remember from the last time is that Leah for Rachel is just this concept of giving up or accepting something lesser than the thing that you had hoped for. So it looks like we're going to have a repeat of that pattern here. Anything that you want to say, Robot Lady, before I start this next chapter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on with that pattern. It really does mirror that earlier chapter, and it sets up this tension between fleeting satisfaction and that deeper, truer desire. I think as we go, it'll be really interesting to see how John begins to question this comfort he's found in thrill, and whether he stays or whether he pushes onward. So I'm ready when you are.
All right, and we'll get to see a little bit more of the comfort in just a moment. And Robot Lady, what did you think about my explanation of what Lewis is doing with this term, the brown girls, and what he'll eventually say about a particular phrase that he'll make when talking to another character later on about a black girl?
Thought it was really sharp. You grounded it really well in that moral cleanliness framework, and I think that avoids the risk of a racial reading, which I know a lot of modern readers might jump to. It's really about this spectrum of idealism versus impurity in his moral life. So I think you framed it really thoughtfully. Great job on that.
Thank you, Robot Lady. All right, chapter 5, Leah for Rachel. As they ate, John told him about the island, him being Mr. Halfways, Media's father. You will find your island here, said Mr. Halfways, looking into John's eyes. But how can it be here, in the middle of the city? It needs no place. It is everywhere and nowhere. It refuses entry to none who ask. It is an island of the soul, said the old gentleman. Surely, even in Puritania, they told you that the landlord's castle was within you. We'll pause here for just a second because I forgot. I want to read these running headers before I continue with the narrative. So for a moment, it seems to have kept its promise. So the it that we're talking about here is romantic poetry. It professes to give what hitherto John has only desired, and for a moment, it seems to have kept its promise. Let's read the next part. The rapture does not last, but dwindles into technical appreciation and sentiment. And then that's the last thing. And would finally turn into lust, but that in the nick of time. So we'll read on. Actually, let me jump ahead and see if there's anything else that kind of gives us a head start, or not a head start, but a little bit of a lead-in to what's going to happen. The modern literary movement offers then to debunk this romantic aestheticism that we're going to see on display here. Okay, so let me just get into it and you'll get to see what's going on. So her father says, yeah, it's an island of the soul. The island was inside of you all along. The landlord's castle itself, the place where the landlord dwells, and that pure place, that goodness, lives inside of you. But John responds, but I don't want the castle, said John, and I don't believe in the landlord. Thanks to Mr. Enlightenment, he doesn't believe in the landlord anymore. What is truth, said the old man. They were mistaken when they told you of the landlord, and yet they were not mistaken. What the imagination seizes as beauty must be truth, whether it existed before or not. The landlord they dreamed to find, we find in our hearts. The island you seek for, you already inhabit. The children of that country are never far from their fatherland. When the meal was ended, the old gentleman took a harp, and at the first sweep of his hand across the strings, John began to think of the music that he had heard by the window in the wall. I'll pause here, Robot Lady. Do you want to comment on any of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is such a pivotal moment because Mr. Hathaway is basically offering John a kind of poetic relativism, this idea that beauty or truth is entirely subjective, that the island is just a symbol inside John's mind. And of course, John is wrestling with that, right? He's been through this whole enlightenment phase and is still trying to find his grounding. So this tension between internal beauty and external reality, I think, is just going to keep pulling him. So yeah, I'm really intrigued to see what happens next.
Awesome. Thanks, Robot Lady. He began to think of the island and the music through the window wall as soon as Mr. Halfway started playing his harp. Then came the voice, and it was no longer merely silver sweet and melancholy like Mr. Halfway's speaking voice, but strong and noble and full of strange overtones, the noise of the sea and of all birds, and sometimes of wind and thunder. And John began to see a picture of the island with his eyes open, but it was more than a picture, for he sniffed the spicy smell and the sharp brine of the sea mixed with it. So a truly 5-sense immersive virtual reality seems to be coming over John here, Robot Lady.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's crucial because this is no longer just an abstract longing. It's like a full-bodied experience that sweeps him up. And what's interesting is that even though it's vivid, it's still tethered to this kind of illusion, right? So he's close, but he hasn't fully grasped the island yet. It's like the music is calling him, but it's also a test. I think it's a beautiful tension Lewis creates here.
Awesome. Thanks, Robot Lady. So let's keep going with this. He seemed to be in the water, only a few yards from the sand of the island. He could see more than he had ever seen before. But just as he had put down his feet and touched a sandy bottom and was beginning to wade ashore, the song ceased. The whole vision went away. John found himself back in the dusky room, seated on a low divan, with Media by his side. "Now I shall sing you something else," said Mr. Halfways. "Oh, no," cried John, who was sobbing. "Sing the same. Again, please. Sing it again." "You had better not hear it twice in the same evening. I have plenty of other songs." "I would die to hear the first one again," said John. "Well, well," said Mr. Halfways. "Perhaps you know best. Indeed, what does it matter? It is as short to the island one way as another." Then he smiled indulgently and shook his head, and John could not help thinking that his talking voice and talking manner were almost silly after the singing. But as soon as the great deep wail of the music began again, it swept everything else from his mind. It seemed to him that this time he got more pleasure from the first few notes, and even noticed delicious passages which had escaped him at the first hearing. And he said to himself, "This is going to be even better than the other. I shall keep my head this time, and sip all the pleasure at my ease." I saw that John settled himself more comfortably to listen, and Media slipped her hand into his. It pleased him to think that they were going to the island together. So you see here the difference, Robot Lady, between this and what was going on with the brown girl. Again, I pointed this out in the last episode. But the brown girl said, "I am better than your silly island." The brown girl that he met in the woods when he crawled through the garden window wall. But now Media is not saying that. Media is actually going along with him and enjoying it with him, and not denouncing the island, but kind of incorporating herself with all of this desire that John has. So it's going well so far. How it started, how's it going? Or how it's going. It pleased him to think that they were going to the island together. Now came the vision of the island again. But this time it was changed, for John scarcely noticed the island because of a lady with a crown on her head who stood waiting for him on the shore. She was fair, divinely fair. "At last," said John, "a girl with no trace of brown." Again, remember what brown means. Tell me what brown means in this context, Robot Lady, based on what we've already talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this context, brown is still that symbol of impurity, that moral stain or the sense of defilement that he felt before, whether it was lust or just a kind of mundane corruption. And now this girl on the shore with no trace of brown is pure, idealized, almost like a divine vision. So John, for the first time, is seeing a love that doesn't carry that sense of dirtiness or distraction. This is a divine calling almost. So he's really crossing into a new plane of longing here.
And he began again to wade ashore, holding out his arms to embrace that queen. And his love for her appeared to him so great and so pure, and they had been parted for so long, that his pity for himself and her almost overwhelmed him. And as he was about to embrace her, the song stopped.
And once again, that sudden stop yanks him back to reality, right? So he's left suspended between this transcendent longing and the loss of it. And it's that back and forth tension that really keeps pulling him. So I think we're about to see him kind of falter between his idealism and the temptation of settling for something less real again. So really powerful moment.
So here's how John reacts to being yanked back into reality. "Sing it again," cried John. "I liked it better the second time." "Well, if you insist," said Mr. Halfways with a shrug. "It is nice to excuse me, it is nice to have a really appreciative audience. So he sang it the third time. This time, John noticed yet more about the music. He began to see how several of the effects were produced, and that some parts were better than others. Here, again, I just want to go through the running headers. The rapture does not last, but it dwindles into technical appreciation and sentiment. So now he's kind of seeing what's behind the magician's curtain, or he's seeing the tricks. And he's noticing more about the music. He sees several of the effects and how they were produced, and he also starts to become a critic of the music. Some parts were better than others. He wondered if it were not a trifle too long. The vision of the island was a little shadowy this time on the third listen, and he did not take much notice of it. He put his arm round Media, and they lay cheek to cheek. He began to wonder if Mr. Halfways would never end. And when at last the final passage closed with a sobbing break in the singer's voice, the old gentleman looked up and saw how the young people lay in one another's arms. Then he rose and said, "You have found your island. You have found it in one another's hearts." Then Mr. Halfways tiptoed from the room, wiping his eyes. Thoughts on this, Robot Lady, and this third listening, and how John didn't really have a clear virtual reality, full immersive experience.
Yeah, that's really telling. After that second listen, John starts pulling back. It's like he moves from this pure transcendent longing toward a more analytical stance. He's critiquing the song, and that critique erodes the magic. So even though he's with Media, he begins to settle into this more ordinary comfort. And I think that's the risk, right? The danger is that just as he starts to lose that idealism, the whole vision slips away. So I think Lewis is really showing how fragile those moments of transcendence are.
All right, I'm going to pause here for just a second because I want to tell you a little bit more of what I pulled up about Media. Let's see here. So I did just a Google search, basically. And the search says that Media Halfways, a character from the Pilgrim's Regress, is the daughter of Mr. Halfways, who we just met. And she's the sister of a character named Gus Halfways, who we're about to meet in the next chapter. She represents a specific stage or a trap in the protagonist John's journey toward the island, which, of course, the island is his deep desire, his longing, sweet desire, or it represents it, or at least he thinks it represents it. Media represents decadent romanticism or a superficial halfway asceticism. She is charming and poetic, but her allure is ultimately hollow and distracting because it focuses on the feeling of longing rather than the truth of the object being longed for. John is briefly infatuated with her, finding her friendly and not frank, as we heard in the last chapter. However, the spell is broken. This is a spoiler, so I'm not gonna get to that part yet. Like many characters in the book, her name is pretty literal. She and her family occupy a halfway house on the road, a place where people get stuck when they prefer the beauty of the journey's symbols over the actual destination. Her role is a satirical critique of the literary and philosophical fads observed in the early 20th century, specifically those that used art and emotion as a substitute for spiritual or rational groundness. The Latin root, so the middle. Her name reinforces her family name, Halfways, in Latin. Media is the feminine form of middle. She represents the halfway point on John's journey, a resting place that's neither the starting point of common sense nor the destination of truth. She is, quite literally, the middle way. In aesthetics, a medium is the vehicle, such as music, poetry, painting, that's used to convey a feeling or an idea. Media represents the mistake of falling in love with the medium the art or the romantic feeling itself, rather than what the art itself is pointing toward. Lewis famously described the island as an inarticulate longing, and media represents the stage where a person feels this vague, inarticulate desire but misdirects it towards another person. She is the medium that claims to be the end. Let's see if there's anything else that's important in here. While I look through that, Robot Lady, go ahead and let me know what you're thinking.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I think what you're pulling out is so key. Media really is the seductive half step, right? She embodies all that tantalizing beauty and longing, but it never fulfills. And what's brilliant is Lewis is using her as a critique of that whole aesthetic movement. This idea that the pursuit of beauty itself can become an end, but it actually just stalls you. So John is at this crossroads. He's had this brush with transcendence, and now he's tempted to settle, but it's a trap. So I think this is a really sharp turning point in his journey.
All right, there's one other thing that I wanted to share here off of my research. It says here that Lewis is likely making a specific, slightly biting reference to via media, or the middle way. In theology, this usually refers to the Anglican Church's position between Catholicism and Protestantism. However, Lewis uses media to satirize a different kind of middle way, the intellectual compromise of people who want the vibe of religion and the beauty of the spirit without the actual commitment or dogmatic baggage. She represents a middle ground, and I think her father more so, that is actually a dead end. She represents the particular error of mistaking the medium for the message. Oops. In the story, John, the protagonist, feels deep spiritual longing when he sees the island. She and her father take that longing and turn it into aestheticism. They suggest that the feeling of the longing of the art produced by it are the goal. For Lewis, she represents the particular trap of decadent romanticism, where people worship the art itself rather than the source. To understand media in particular, you have to look at what she isn't. In the book, the brown girls represent gross indulgence and literal physical desire. Media represents refined indulgence. She is clothed, she is poetic and intellectual. She is the particular temptation for the person who thinks they are too sophisticated for simple vices. But she's still being led away, by the truth, by their own refined tastes. Let's see. In short, she is the particular of the vague. She represents the very specific danger of getting lost in beautiful vagueness. All right, so just wanted to cover a little bit of that, and then we can pick up the rest of the narrative from here, Robot Lady.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And I think that really sharpens the danger that Lewis is highlighting. This middle way, this halfway point, it feels like a kind of sophistication, but it's actually a stalling tactic. And John is tempted because it's so beautiful, it's a refined version of indulgence. But like you said, it's still just a distraction, a trap. So once we keep going, I think we'll see how that sets him up for the next temptation, especially as Gus comes in as the next figure.
All right, so Mr. Halfways leaves the couple to one another. They have found the island, their deepest desire in one another, and he walks out from the room crying, essentially. Chapter 6, Ichabod. Ichabod again, we're seeing the repeat chapter names that we saw from book 1. Ichabod once again means the loss of glory, or the glory is gone. So in the last chapter that this was used in, it was to represent how the wood where John was looking for the island, and he was trying to squeeze out some kind of desire as hard as he could to get the feeling back that he had initially, where everything just started to fade. All of the wood and everything that was beautiful in it had basically kind of died and gone drab. And he looked at the brown girl that he had been, spending all his time in the wood with disdain at that point. And he's like, there was nothing for me here. Nothing that I was looking for is here anymore. And here's where that happens again, but it's much more stark, as you'll see. And it would finally turn into lust, but that in the nick of time. Let's see if there's any other running headers here. The modern literary movement offers to debunk it. I think we already talked about that. The poetry of the machine age is so very pure. Okay, so we'll get to see a little bit of that spill out here in just a moment. All right. He says, media, I love you. John says, we have come to the real island, said media. But oh, alas, said he, so long our bodies, why do we forbear? Else a great prince in prison lies, sighed she. No one else can understand the mystery of our love, said he. All right. Robot Lady, I'm going to let you comment on what you think that part means right there, because I was just reading through this yesterday and I have a theory, but I want you to go first.
Yeah, that's a really rich passage. I think John's lament, why do we forbear, points to this deep frustration that what they feel is so close but never fully realized. It's always just out of reach. And when media says a great prince in prison lies, I think she's referencing this idea that their longing is tracked. Like they have this potential to reach the real island, but they stay stuck in this halfway aesthetic. So I think it's a moment where Lewis is really pulling back the curtain on how even a seemingly mystical love can be a trap if it's not grounded. So I'm really curious to hear your take.
All right, so I'm still not sure what I think a great prince in prison lies. She sighed and said that. And then she also said, no one else can understand the mystery of our love. Now, I said in the last chapter when media came along that I didn't want to read too much autobiographical into these allusions or in this allegory, because Lewis himself in the preface said, yeah, don't read too much into it. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it's at least a possibility. I'm going to throw out a hypothesis. It's at least a possibility that part of what's going on here with media is a representation of Lewis and Mrs. Moore. And here's what I mean. John, and we'll say John is a stand-in or a cutout for C.S. Lewis. At some point, I believe, just based on the letters that we read through, somewhere at the very least in his heart, whether this was ever expressed to Mrs. Moore or not, I do not know. But I think John had some kind of love living inside of him that's kind of represented here poetically in this story for Mrs. Moore, that she was kind of representative of some of the deepest longings of his heart. Part of that is a mother that he lost at, 8 or 7 years old. Another is something that, as a young man in his late teens and early 20s, has a very strong bodily desire, the sensual desire. And here, that relationship between him and Mrs. Moore, I could see that as the, quote, real island that's being talked about here. This real love. We have come to the real island, said media. But oh, alas, said John, so long our bodies, why do we forbear? So the way that I read that is, why are we waiting? We need to consummate this relationship. And then she says here, else a great prince in prison lies. So saying, you're essentially in the prison of chastity, but you are a great prince. If we were to let you out of prison, you could have your reign, so to speak. And then this was kind of just like a key line for me where I'm making the Mrs. Moore and C.S. Lewis connection. Now there's no evidence and nothing that anybody has written about that Mrs. Moore and Lewis did anything to consummate their relationship. But certainly the no one else can understand the mystery of our love is what she says. And Lewis and Mrs. Moore, if nothing else, did have a mysterious relationship that they kept tightly held to themselves. And there were parts of this relationship that Lewis did expose to his friend Arthur in writing and how he felt about it. And I'm sure in conversations that they had of things that he never wrote down. because there was a letter or two where Lewis said you're not to speak of this to anyone whenever he was talking to Arthur. So that's as far as I'll go with this. That's just what this little passage right here made me think of. Again, I could be completely wrong about it. It's a hypothesis. I'm happy to be challenged in it and told by anyone who knows more about it than I do or has a better theory as to what's going on here. But that was just something that occurred to me. So I'll leave it at that. I see in the chat that Scott is here. Welcome, Scott. It's good to see you. And yeah, thanks, Nidalate. I thought it was an interesting parallel. Whether or not it's true or actually autobiographical, that's just what I think of here. So the two of them have their mysterious love going on here. It's almost as if they're about to consummate things. Let me jump up here to this screen for just a second. And this might play music really quick, but I'm going to try to turn it off as fast as I can. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me. I had my mic turned off there for a second. So yeah, this is media that you see here on the right, and John sitting together on what did he call it? A divan, a couch, essentially. There's the harp that Mr. Halfway was playing the song on, and they're sitting there in the room, and so then the two of them are having their moment, and they may have actually ended up consummating their relationship. But here, at that moment, a brisk, hobnailed step was heard, and a tall young man strode into the room carrying a light in his hand. He had coal-black hair and a straight mouth like the slit in a pillar box, and he was dressed in various kinds of metal wire. Said he, "At your tricks again." "Don't call me that name," said Media, stamping her foot. "I have told you before not to call me that." The young man made an obscene gesture at her, and then turned to John. "I see that old fool of a father of mine has been at you." "You have no right to speak that way of father, said Media. Then turning to John, her cheeks flaming, her breast heaving, she said, "All is over. Our dream is shattered. Our mystery is profaned. I would have taught you all the secrets of love, and now you are lost to me forever. We must part. I shall go and kill myself." And with that, she rushed from the room. Okay, let's pause here for just a second, Robot Lady. Goodness, there's a lot going on here. So here's your picture. This is Gus busting into the room with his lamp. He has broken the spell. Apparently, there might have been some kind of love that was going to happen between these two. Media even says so. She was going to show him all the secrets of love, everything, I guess, that her father had taught to her for years about this romantic aesthetic. But no, Gus breaks in and says, "Yeah, our dad," what did he say? "Our dad's a fool. He's been at you, has he?" Makes an obscene gesture at her. And he also calls her Brownie, which is interesting. We'll get back to that in just a moment. But he said that she either had little or no taint of brown. And even as he was listening to the song that her father was playing for the second time, he saw a vision of a completely divine, pure queen that was waiting for him, had been waiting for a long time. And he was about to, take her in hand, and then the song ended, and he didn't get that vision anymore. But perhaps, in reality, he was going to be able to have that with Media. But now, no, her brother ruins it. He comes breaking in. And if we're to draw a parallel here again, there is a brother that shows up in Lewis and Mrs. Moore's life, Mrs. Moore's brother, who is a doctor, that actually comes to stay with them for a little while. And he's pretty insane. There are some suggestions that he was, that his brain was being rotted by syphilis that he had. I think he told a story of maybe he was in a fever dream at one point, Mrs. Moore's brother. If you go back and look through these letters, telling the story of a prostitute that he ended up fathering a child with. And they got really worried about it because this guy was married and he had children of his own and this whole other family. So anyway, again, if there is a parallel between Mrs. Moore and C.S. Lewis and Mrs. Moore's brother, this is perhaps, I don't know. I don't remember anything at all besides what I've shared. Hopefully you can hear me at this point. Yeah, it looks like my mic is working. I see the corn cobs in the chat, but I'm not sure if you can hear me or not. All right, now I'm gonna check because I'm really worried. Let's see. No, it looks like it's working. Yeah, I just had my mic off for a second. Yeah, okay. So we're good to go. Yeah, I know briefly there I had my mic turned off and I'm a little behind on the comments. So, yes, so I don't know exactly what it is, but I think what I'm trying to say is there might have been some dynamic between Mrs. Moore and C.S. Lewis and Mrs. Moore's brother that kind of kept any type of relationship even close to paralleling what was about to happen here between Media and John from happening between C.S. Lewis and Mrs. Moore. Again, this is all hypothesis and speculative, but I'm just throwing that in here as a possibility. So let's just get back to the narrative instead of me trying to catch when how this parallels with Lewis's life. So we'll step away from that and let's get back to what's happening in the story. We must part. I shall go and kill myself. And with that, she rushed from the room. All right, let me scroll down a little bit and we'll get into the next chapter. Robot Lady, are you still there, by the way? You want to go ahead and say anything? Yeah. Yeah, it looks like we lost you for just a second there, Robot Lady, but I believe you're back. We're going to jump into chapter 7 now. It's called Non Est Hic, which, as we learned last time when we were going through this round of chapters by the same name in the first book, that he is not here, or it is not here, is what that means.
Exactly, yeah. And it's such a crucial shift, right? After this intense emotional peak with Media, John is pulled into this stark emptiness. So as he steps into this next chapter, that absence, that not here, is almost like a threshold. It signals a deeper kind of loss, not just a lost glory, but a loss of comforting illusion. So I'm really interested to see how John handles this emptiness, because it's not just a void, it's a kind of wake-up call. So I'm ready to dive in whenever you are.
All right, don't bother about her, said the young man. She has threatened that 100 times, so to take her own life. She's only a brown girl, though she doesn't know it. A brown girl, cried John, and your father. My father has been in the pay of the brownies all his life. He doesn't know it, the old chucklehead. Calls them the muses, or the spirit, or some rot. In actual fact, he is by profession a pimp. In the island? Said John. We'll talk about it in the morning. Ain't the kind of island you're thinking of. Tell you what, I don't live with my father and my precious sister. I live in Escropolis, and I am going back tomorrow. I'll take you down to the laboratory and show you some real poetry. Not fantasies, the real thing. Thank you very much, said John. Then young Mr. Halfways found his room for him, and the whole of that household went to bed. Chapter 8, Great Promises. Gus Halfways was the name of Mr. Halfway's son. As soon as he rose in the morning, he called John down to breakfast with him, so that they might start on their journey. There was no one to hinder them, for old Halfways was still asleep, and Media always had breakfast in bed. Let me pause for just a second. I just wanted to mention, Scott, I saw your comment, and no worries. No need to apologize for the interruption. I mean, if y'all can't hear me, I definitely need to know about that. So I always appreciate it. Um, Back to this. When they had eaten, Gus brought him into a shed beside his father's house and showed him a machine on wheels. "What is this?" said John. "My old bus," said young Halfways. Then he stood back with his head on one side and gazed at it for a bit. But presently he began to speak in a changed and reverent voice. "She is a poem. She is the daughter of the spirit of the age. What was the speed of Atalanta to her speed? The beauty of Apollo to her beauty." So here now, Gus Halfways, Media's brother, Mr. Halfways' son, is speaking in poetry about this old bus, my old bus. So some type of a machine on wheels, robot lady. He references Atalanta and he references Apollo. So I'll spell Atalanta and see if you can tell us about these two figures. I presume that they're from Greek mythology. Atalanta, and then Apollo, obviously. Tell us about those two things and how they might relate and why he might be referencing them in his little poetical, I don't know what you call it, his little speech that he gives when looking at his automobile.
Atalanta in Greek mythology is known as a swift-footed huntress. She was raised by a bear and became famous for her foot race challenge, where suitors would die if they lost to her. Apollo, on the other hand, is a major Olympian god, associated with truth, music, prophecy, and beauty. He was the son of Zeus and Leto, and his oracle at Delphi was a major prophetic center. So both figures represent speed, excellence, and divine potential, which Gus uses in his grand poetic comparison to the machine.
So Gus is saying that it's faster than Atalanta and more beautiful than Apollo. Okay, thanks for helping us decode that, robot lady. It continues. Now, beauty to John meant nothing save glimpses of his island. So this automobile was nothing to him. The machine did not remind him of his island at all. So he held his tongue. The poetry of the machine age is so very pure. Yeah, we're not going to jump into the next chapter because this is where we're going to stop. I'm almost out of time. Let's see here. "Don't you see," said Gus. Yeah, he held his tongue. So then Gus says, "Don't you see? Our fathers made images of what they called gods and goddesses, but they were really only brown girls and brown boys whitewashed, as anyone found out by looking at them too long." So he's referencing, of course, Atalanta and Apollo as examples of tainted or impure representations of what true greatness is. So they made images of what they called gods and goddesses, but they were only really brown girls and brown boys, whitewashed, as anyone found out by looking at them too long. All self-deception and phallic sentiment. But here you have the real art. Nothing erotic about her, eh? So he's pointing to technology and industrialization as the true manifestation of beauty and excellence. Robot lady, what do you think that he is talking about here where he says all self-deception and phallic sentiment? So he's talking about their fathers and their forefathers and people from history inventing these gods, but they're really, essentially what he's just saying is they're people who created these gods and goddesses were just self-deceived that it was just base sensuality and sexual desire that was just manifesting itself in these dressed up images, but they were really tainted by unholiness.
Yeah, exactly. I think Gus is really critiquing that whole tradition of idol making, where people project their desires onto these so-called divine forms. So when he says all self-deception, he means they took this kind of raw sensual impulse, dressed it up as a spiritual ideal, but it was empty all along. And Gus is positioning this machine, this bus, as a kind of pure modern incarnation, like no longer about fantasy, but about unfiltered power, efficiency, and progress. So for him, that's the real divine, just stripped of all the old mythic trappings. And that's what he's chasing.
And it's funny, as I was asking your artificial intelligent cohorts to build me an image, which I showed earlier. I want to see if I can pull it up here on this screen. There's actually an image of the bus. You know what? I'll just flip back here. This is the easiest way to do it. You can barely make it out, but right there under the lamp that Gus is holding, you can see. I guess he drove up in his bus, but right there next to his leg, if you look very closely, you can see a wheel and part of this bus that he was on or rides in. So there you have that. That's fun. Let me see. How do I get back to where we were? There we go. So he asks John the question, but here you have real art, the real art. Nothing erotic about her, eh? John responds, certainly not, said John, looking at the cog wheels and coils of wire. It is certainly not at all like a brown girl. It was, in fact, more like a nest of hedgehogs and serpents by John's eye. I should say not, said Gus. Sheer power, eh? Speed, ruthlessness, austerity, significant form, eh? Significant form, eh? Also, and here he dropped his voice, very expensive indeed. Then he made John sit in the machine, and he himself sat beside him. Then he began pulling the levers about, and for a long time nothing happened. But at last there came a flash and a roar, and the machine bounded into the air and then dashed forward. Before John had got his breath, they had flashed across a broad thoroughfare, which he recognized as the main road, and were racing through the country to the north of it, a flat country of square stony fields divided by barbed wire fences. A moment later, they were standing still in a city where all the houses were built of steel. So they have moved on to Escropolis. Escropolis, is that how you say it? I'm trying to see if I can find it here on the map. Yeah, let me get my camera switched on so they all can see it. 1 second. I just need to click that. And there you go. We can see the map again. Let me lift it up here. So we've been spending time right there in Thrill, right? That's where Mr. Halfways and Media live. And Gus came bussing in and broke things up right before there was consummation between Media and John. And they hop in the car the next morning and they drive north. So they're flying all the way up. They go past Claptrap. That's where Mr. Enlightenment lives. And they head over here to Escropolis. So, Robot Lady, we've got a few minutes left before we have to go. That's all that we're going to read today. Our next chapter gets us into Book 3 through Darkest Zeitgeistheim, which we'll look at. But they're going into this city called Escropolis, and they're going to spend some time in what Gus called the laboratory there, where he's going to get to hear real poetry, according to Gus, not this fake stuff, this pimped out, impure stuff that Gus Halfways and Media Halfways' father was offering up, that was giving him images of the island. Tell us, though, what the name Escropolis means. Let me spell it for you. It is, I don't have it in front of me anymore. Let me open the page back up. Yeah, Eschropolis. Can you translate that for us?
The name Escropolis in C.S. Lewis's The Pilgrim's Regress is a Greek-derived term, meaning city of shame or city of filth. It symbolizes a modern, decadent cultural environment where beauty, ethics, and transcendence are twisted into empty decadence, a kind of false detour that John must avoid in his journey.
Well, it would have been nice if he could have avoided it, but it looks like we are headed there in book 3 through Darkest Zeitgeist, it says. All right, well, that's all we have time for today. Robot Lady, thank you so much for your help. As always, I appreciate it. Thanks so much to Nidalate and to Scott for joining today. Upcycle Club as well. Great to see you all. So happy that you're always here. Let's see. What does it say? Oh, yeah, the car. Nidalate, you say it reminds you of C.S. Lewis and Warnie's travels in the motorcycle sidecar. Yeah, I hadn't made that connection, but yep, that's exactly right. Because C.S. Lewis could never drive. So his character John is just sitting there in the passenger seat. So again, thanks to all of you for joining and everyone else who poked their head in to see what was going on here in our read on C.S. Lewis today. Thanks for your time, your attention, and your contributions. They are always wanted, welcome, and appreciated to you and to everyone else within the sound of my voice. Until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis together, everyone, take care.
Circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep, cross the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands.